Maggie, students there were not sitting at their desks in lines, they were taking quite an active part in the lesson. What did you think of that?
I think that is brilliant. They're taking the confusion of the quotes and really having to think about, am I stood in the right part of the room? What does this mean? And I thought the way the teacher interacted with them was fantastic. Really good lesson, I thought.
So did you feel again, Elaine, that we were seeing kids really engaged?
You could see that the children participating well, but it makes me wonder how many other schools actually do this. I mean, I know some teenagers, that just can't get the concept of Macbeth, and they just don't understand it.
Mm. It's very, I mean, Shakespeare's very complicated. Even some of us adults find it complicated. Do you think that parents ought to be able to be guaranteed at such a level of teaching like this?
Yes, I do. I mean, you're absolutely right. Not all teaching is like that, and we've seen 3 clips that are, very good English teachers who are clearly passionate about their subject. Shakespeare has to be taught in a Year 9 class because of the SATs tests and things like that, and the problem is that teachers can sometimes feel under pressure to teach in certain ways that actually don't help the children engage with the text at all. You've seen a teacher there who's doing something active, engaging the children's interest, and she's got the confidence to know that that's going to help them learn that play and do well.
Nobody's actually raised the issue of whether children of 13 or 14 should be studying Shakespeare. Well, Elaine, do you think...
To be honest, I was going to ask whether there was other plays and books that the children could read rather than Shakespeare, which would still come within the guidelines of the national curriculum.
I think it's in the national curriculum because of certain literary heritage notions that certain people in suits have.
Why do you think that is? Yeah, I think there is a very traditional view of teaching English, and Shakespeare must be part of it, but would you agree with that?
I would, yeah, but not for those reasons. I think I would say that there is a reason he's been around 400 years, and it's not because he's the establishment, because he wasn't always the establishment. There's a reason that his plays stand out from that time, and it's because of the stories he tells, it's because of the characters that he writes about, it's because, as Johnson said, they're plays for all time. I mean, they are plays that touch people's emotions. The difficulty is we're living in an age where the language has shifted and it's not easily accessible. But then again, some of the language that kids use with each other isn't accessible.
The problem is the SATs test in Year 9 has to have a Shakespeare play in it, which is what Simon's saying. And I think you're questioning that, and I think it is a very interesting question, because I've had the same reaction as a parent, and as an adult it doesn't much like Shakespeare. But this is very inaccessible stuff for a lot of kids, and maybe there would be other ways with some children to learn English.
I mean, I think the problem is, and the teacher you've seen on the video has got around this problem, is you have to teach it because it's statutory and it's a law that's laid down. I would make an argument that I would want to teach Shakespeare for entitlement purposes for kids. The problem comes in school when it becomes dominant because of those SATs tests you've just talked about, and then it becomes taught because they're going to be assessed on it, and not taught because it's actually something that's worth teaching, and let's think about interesting ways to do it. And equally, it shouldn't dominate the English curriculum. It should be a very small part of the English curriculum. English is a massive subject.
It's interesting you've come back to assessment again, and we were talking before about children assessing themselves, teachers assessing pupils and assessing each other, and that's of course the alternative to being driven by tests. I mean, as parents, would you rather see a system that overall was less driven by tests and this sort of rigid, you must do this, and was a bit more fluid and allowed a bit more creativity on the part of the teachers and the students?
I think we need to keep an eye on making sure that we're at the right level with where the kids are at any one time. And I think, as a parent, I think we need to know that how important is the end result, and that we're on the track to get there. But along that way, it's quite nice for them to have some freedom to explore.
OK, well, now we're going to move from English to maths, which is altogether different. And if we couldn't understand Shakespeare, we almost certainly won't be able to understand this. We're going to look at 2 programmes featuring maths agony aunt Wendy Fortescue Hubbard. The first is about an experiment from the 18th century conducted by a mathematician, Le Comte de Buffon. Teacher Steve Emerson introduces the activity to his Year 9 class.
Although Steve tells him Buffon's story, he leaves the purpose of the experiment a mystery.
You have in front of you a rather blank-looking piece of A3 paper. It has lines carefully spaced. You will find that the lines are exactly 1 cocktail stick apart.
Students get going on Steve's scaled-down version of the experiment. Working in groups of 3, one person stands with their back to the paper and throws 20 sticks. The others record how the sticks land on the grid. The experiment is repeated 20 times. And each time the roles of the groups are rotated to create more random data.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
They enter their results into a shared computer network. Steve is then able to draw on all their results and put them into Buffon's formula, which is 2n divided by c, to get an estimate of pi.
The totals of the number of times you've been doing this experiment is shown on the left-hand side. Okay? That is the number of sticks you've actually thrown. On the right-hand side is how many times you have been recording the lines being crossed. And the calculation 2 times n divided by c, shown at the top there, is coming out at the moment at 3.6035 and so on. Okay? If you'd continued this experiment, what eventually do you think the result might have been? Jessie?
Pi.
Elaine, that was an unusual lesson and possibly a bit incomprehensible to some parents. What did you make of it?
I was completely lost with it, I'll be honest. I think a lot of parents are completely lost with maths now. And I think that's why a lot of children can't get help and support when they go home. The children don't understand it when they leave the class, and when they get home the parents don't understand it, so they can't get the support there.
Simon, do you think it matters that parents can't understand these abstract concepts?
Yes, I think so. Well, I mean, certainly because that's where the children are going at night and that's where the support needs to be. And I think maths is an interesting case because I think it's changed radically in the last 10 years and the numeracy strategy's done that. But I think it's done that precisely because too many people of the generation that have now got children don't like maths because their maths teaching at school was dreadful. And it's quite acceptable to go around saying, I can't do maths. You never go around saying, I can't read. That's something you should be ashamed of. But people are quite happy to say I don't like maths, and it's kind of accepted. So there's a massive drive in maths to make it more investigative, more interesting, the kids engaged. But obviously that means that it's very different from people's experience at home, so there does need to be a massive job in communicating what maths is now. Because I was quite good at maths at school. I don't understand that. I could do pi quite happily until the cows come home. I've got an A-level in further maths. I don't get that at all. It's not because I don't know maths, it's because they are using these new methods specifically to try and engage kids. But they are going home to people who don't necessarily understand what the hell's going on. So there's a problem.
I really appreciate that maths needs to be embraced and linked to real life situations. I think that's really important to make it mean something. So if they can come home and because they've been taught a new concept, that actually means something and they're going to be able to do something now that they couldn't do before. And I think that's really, really important.
But Elaine, do you think this is a source of conflict, though, between parents and children, that parents have been taught it one way, children are being taught it a different way now? The parents want to go back to help them doing it their way, and often they end up arguing about it.
Yes, there's a big conflict, because if you do try and help your child, it's a different method, and then the child ends up so confused they don't know whether they're coming or going. And when they go back into school, the teacher's going up to say, well, you shouldn't have done it that way, you should have done it the way I taught you. But if you don't know that method, then it's very hard to teach a child that method.
Can you envisage a situation where it wouldn't be necessary for children to be supported at home because the entire curriculum would be taught within the school?
I don't think that would ever happen, no. I mean, I think that's a kind of, well, it might be a utopia, I'm not sure. I mean, I think parents want to be involved with their children's education because it's a major part of their lives and it's a major part of them becoming adults and becoming people. So parents would want to be involved in children's education, not simply because the kids can't do it and they want to help them do it, but because they're interested in what's going on and how they're being taught. And I think that's always going to be the case. And I think every piece of educational research shows that parents who are supporting their children do much better in schools.
Well, maths lessons are obviously challenging for parents as well as pupils, but perhaps an example from the real world will help. It's about house prices and shows students trying to understand the difference between 3 kinds of average.
We found the most, median and mean, but we have a problem.
What's your problem?
We found an extra house at 140,000. It doesn't affect the mode. We've
Why?
reworked out the
Why
mean.
doesn't it affect the mode?
Because the mode's
It's the most recurring. But
and there's only the only one of that house. We've redone the mean.
How did you redo the mean?
We
got the answer
we multiplied our average by 23 again to get our number, then we added it on and divided by 24.
Good,
Did
right,
you divide it by
excellent.
24?
That's very good.
23.
And have you redone the median?
No, because we now have an even amount of numbers.
So what do you think you're going to have to do?
Do we have to? I think we have to do it halfway between the two. Right, it's going to be halfway between.
Okay,
12
now
and
guys,
13. Yeah.
once you've got your modes, median and mean, okay, now look what happens up there. I've got average house price, 142,000. How many averages have you got? 3. So which one are you going to use?
When you say an average, most people think of add it all together then divide it by.
Right, so therefore most people are wrong, aren't they? Because you know better now. If I said to somebody who's a statistician like yourselves or like myself,
Yeah.
okay, and I said average, what would be your first question?
What average is that?
And that's what I want you to talk about now.
The aims of the lesson for myself were to get the pupils thinking and interpreting the data that they actually collect, rather than them just blindly going through and calculating these means, these medians, these modes, and working out these averages. I want them to think a little bit more about which was the appropriate average to use in certain situations, and to therefore interpret what they were actually doing in the first place.
That was a much more practical example about handling and using data. Did you find that more accessible?
Yes, I did. I thought it was an excellent method that they used, and as the first child said, it'll stay with her for like later on. But it's something that's everyday life. The children themselves will remember that, so it'll become part of history for them as well as learning it within their maths lesson.
Simon, do you think that maths lends itself to these sort of different teaching styles in the way that English does?
Yes, I think it does. I mean, ideas of group work and using oral work and investigative approaches and kinesthetic approaches, he was doing the cocktail sticks. I mean, I think the problem that mathematicians have, and we deal with at our university, is it's seen as quite a dry subject, and sometimes you go too far in trying to make it interesting, so that actually it becomes more difficult when you've done it. So I think that example with the breadsticks thing leaves you kind of cold, because I can see what the teacher's trying to do. He's trying to be really, really interesting with it. So the kids enjoy doing it, but I doubt many of them have got a real concept of what pi is at the end of it. Whereas the second teacher there, his approach to making it interesting was to try and make it relevant to them. So they're all going, yeah, hell, £142,000 for a house. So it is sticking in their mind and they're getting the concept. So it's a really fine balance to try and get something that's going to interest and engage, but not be so kind of wacky that it goes beyond actually teaching the point that you're trying to teach. I think that's a challenge in maths, but I do think you can use those approaches.
Do you think at this sort of level that maths ought to be more practical and less conceptual, maybe, for children who maybe aren't going to take it on to a much higher level?
I think it's much easier for children with lower abilities to take it all in when it's on a practical level.
I think it needs to be horses for courses and different levels for different children. And I think that some children learn visually, some other children like to be taught, and I think it's a case of back to the groups again, getting the groups right, and perhaps teaching. It must be very difficult to do, but there must be different ways which could get the same information into the child.
But it would imply a totally different sort of curriculum to the one we're currently teaching.
I think what it would imply more pertinently is a different form of assessment to the one we've currently got, because the problem is you can do all these practical and lovely approaches, and teachers do, and good teachers do it, but if they've got to go and sit an exam and write for an hour and a half at the end of it, that isn't going to help them. You've got to find more imaginative ways to assess what children can do so that they can be rewarded for the skills they've got and encouraged to develop them. And, you know, I think there's some movement there at 14 to 19 to try and say, let's have a more flexible way of assessing children, not just everyone do GCSEs, everybody do AS levels. You've got to find different ways to reward kids and let them flourish in the areas that they do. So I think the teachers want to do that. I think the will is there. I think the big thing that needs to be shifted is the way that children are assessed and the people's understanding of what assessment means.
Well, I think we're back where we started, really, with support for children and parents and assessment. And I think most parents would agree with the comments we've heard from you. But we have to end it there. You can have your say, though, by emailing parents@teachers.tv. And you can find all the information about programmes you've seen and more on our website at Teachers TV. Details at the end of the programme. Thanks to my guests on this programme, Maggie, Elaine and Simon.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And from myself, Fiona Miller, thanks for joining us, and until next time, goodbye.